My name is Alicia Duncan, and I am here in Scotland and in the UK to talk about the terrible effects of what can happen when euthanasia and assisted dying is legalized. My mom was in a car accident, a minor car accident, and suffered a concussion in February of 2020. And over the next 18 months, she slowly began to deteriorate and lose weight. The doctors could not figure out the reasoning for this weight loss. They ruled out everything from cancer to fibromyalgia and everything in between. And it was a few months before my mom's passing that my sister and I began to speculate that this might be psychosomatic, that she was intentionally starving herself. And that was the reasoning for the weight loss. We noticed that she was restricting her diet, that there was very limited foods that she would actually eat. She was pureeing everything. She began wearing her clothes inside out. She had a visor on. She couldn't look at screens. She was claiming she was allergic to everything, that she had sensitivity all over her body. And she self-diagnosed herself with something called central sensitivity syndrome, which is really an umbrella term for things like fibromyalgia that cause a tingling sensation all over your body. She had an appointment to see a specialist in this condition, and that was for 2 weeks after her death. It had taken 18 months for her to see a specialist, but she was approved to die within 10 days. We found out 48 hours before my mom was scheduled to end her life that she had applied for medical assistance in dying and had been approved. And my sister and I just could not rationalize how this could even be possible because she had no terminal condition. The only thing that she had been formally diagnosed with was depression and post-concussion syndrome. We didn't know what to do. There was no system in place. There's still no system in place. So we called the police, and the police confirmed our worst nightmare was that my mom met all of the legal requirements. And the police told us the only thing we could do to try to stop this was to get a court order. And so that's what we did. We went to the provincial courthouse and requested an emergency hearing with a judge, and we were granted that. And I had to plead for my mom's life to show that her mental capacity should be in question because we knew this to be true. She was acting so erratically. She'd been giving away her belongings. We knew she had suicidal ideation. Whatever we said to the judge resonated, and he ordered a warrant for her arrest under the Mental Health Act. When that happened, my mom had to undergo a psychiatric assessment. My mom was a psychiatric nurse for over 4 decades, and she knew all of the things to say to pass these assessments. And although the psychiatric assessment deemed her to be sound of mind, the psychiatrist postponed her application, and my mom was so devastated that she attempted to take her own life and slit her left wrist. And it was at that point that her mental health was questioned, and she was deemed to be temporarily not sound of mind, which made her not eligible to die under the Canadian program. At that point, she was sectioned to a mental health psychiatric unit, ironically the one that she used to manage. We were relieved in that moment, if that's a way that you can describe that. We were obviously devastated, but relieved that she was safe from herself, that she was safe from the doctors. But in Canada, after 48 hours, you have to undergo another psychiatric assessment, and if you are deemed to no longer be temporarily not sound of mind, you can be released, and that's what happened. My mom was released, and 4 hours later, my sister and I received a text message from my mom's common law partner to let us know that she was dead and her body had been taken to a crematorium. After we were told that my mom was dead, I needed to see her. I never got a chance to say goodbye to her or to have the conversations that we should have had. And so I went to the crematorium. I just needed to hold her hand. I needed to kiss her and tell her I love her. You know, it wasn't fair that the last week of her life, I was fighting legally to keep her alive, and I never got to have that chance. neither of us got to have that chance. And because I had ordered an autopsy, they couldn't touch her body when she arrived at the crematorium. When I unzipped the body bag to hold her hand, the IV that the doctor had administered the lethal drugs was still inserted in her arm, 2 inches above the incision where she had tried to take her own life that had barely begun to heal. And it is the worst nightmare that I relive daily. What I want to say to Scottish parliamentarians is you really need to consider every single word. The ambiguous terms in the bills that are being proposed here are eerily similar to Canada. It can be any condition that's advanced and that shortens someone's life. It just has to also be in the doctor's opinion that this might shorten a person's life. You know, a case that comes to mind in Canada is a gentleman was in the hospital for something completely unrelated. And while he was there, a doctor told him he had COPD. In the doctor's opinion, he had COPD. And this person was so upset about it, he enacted his rights for medical assistance in dying. And his life was ended. And afterwards, his family had an autopsy done. And it was confirmed he did not have COPD. But because it just had to be in the doctor's opinion, there's absolutely no recourse for the family. Scotland's bill has terminology that is not clearly defined. It doesn't have defined timeframes. And what can happen is that people who are not terminal, people who are vulnerable, like my mom, will fall through the cracks. They had approved my mom for frailty. She was obviously frail. She had been starving herself. She was 78 pounds at the time of her death. The lens of the Scottish bill is so wide that it would allow someone who is frail to access assisted death. And we're not talking about a tiny number of people that will be able to access it. Up to a quarter of people in Scotland in hospital are frail, are considered frail, and will be approved under this program should they want to access it. That's a quarter of the people in hospital. This bill has the ability to wipe out thousands of people. It's so poorly defined. So many people will be approved under this, and it's preying on vulnerable people. It's preying on vulnerable people. Women traditionally are caregivers. When the roles are reversed and people have to care for them, maybe in a vulnerable state, maybe it is in a terminal context. But for my mom, she felt like a burden. She said to me multiple times in the weeks leading up to her death, she felt like a burden. She felt sorry for her common law partner. She would say things to me like, he married such an independent woman and now look at me. And she would point to her frail body. My mom was never a burden to us. It would have been our honor to care for her, but she felt she had no value if people had to take care of her. And women in particular are really vulnerable to this. They're citing loneliness and feeling like a burden as the reasons for accessing this. My mom financially could have had people to come take care of her. My mom didn't want to even burden anyone else, or maybe she didn't want to spend the money on it even when she desperately needed it. And by doing that, her primary caregiver was her partner, and that's exhausting. And he was so tired and so broken in that. And I can just, see this cycle of how that affects so many people in so many situations. I will never know the conversations that my mom and her common law partner had behind closed doors. But my mom's common law partner did say to my sister, leading up to my mom's death, before we knew she had applied, that as horrific as it would be for your mom to die, at least I would get my life back. He was absolutely suffering from caregiver's fatigue, but You can imagine how my mom felt that she needed to die because she didn't want to burden us. Coercion exists on so many levels. There's external coercion. In abusive cases, coercion is a pattern that takes a very long time to determine. And with euthanasia or assisted suicide, we don't have those timelines. If you ask someone if they are being coerced, they're not going to tell you that if this is something that they want. And also, they might not even know they're being coerced. So that's one level of coercion. What about the examples of, say, family members who might financially benefit from a person's death? I spoke with a woman this week in Westminster who has recovered from anorexia. She suffered for over a decade. And she talked about the internal coercion, this bully that lived inside of her head. And it really resonated with me about how someone can be even coerced within their own mind. We talk about systemic coercion. I've spoken to people with disabilities who on a daily basis are told by able-bodied people that if they had a condition like theirs, that they would rather be dead. It's such a privileged thing to say that we have a right to choose to die, and not realizing how that makes a lot of groups very vulnerable. In Canada, there are people that are accessing assisted suicide because they cannot get disability funding, or if they can get disability funding, it's so low that they are living below the poverty line and they can't afford a home. So they're having to choose between living on the streets or death. We talk about autonomy a lot, and autonomy without choice isn't true autonomy. People are choosing to die out of desperation. There's nothing dignified about these deaths. A doctor has a duty to assess or refer, and that's what happens. Under these systems, a person can doctor shop. My mom's general practitioner, he refused to assess her for medical assistance in dying because he believed that she had not followed through with any of his recommended treatments. She had refused to take antidepressants for her depression. She was eating approximately 800 calories per day. He wanted her to treat her depression. He explicitly stated that she needed to be eating more food, more carbohydrates. Her brain was not functioning properly because of what I think was anorexia. And the people that assessed my mom were a nurse practitioner. A nurse practitioner accepted her into the program. A doctor that she had never met before did the second assessment. I should also note these assessments were done over the phone. It's terrifying to me that when there is a doctor saying that you cannot be approved for this, when they're saying this person should not have access because they need help. They need help to live. But another doctor says, actually, that doesn't matter. Their right to autonomy, to make this choice, is above everything else. The price we pay for so-called autonomy is too high. Vulnerable people are taken advantage of. What the bills in Scotland and in the UK are relying on is that the doctors have good intentions. Even the doctors that do have really good intentions, we have to remember that doctors are humans. Humans make mistakes. But what we've seen in Canada and across the world is that there are a lot of doctors that don't have the best intentions and take advantage of this system. Doctors who believe that anyone should have access to this program are allowing people who are not terminal, who have conditions such as hearing loss or type 2 diabetes. They are approving these people to die. And even people with mental illnesses are now being allowed to access this program, not because it's legally allowed, but because mental illness doesn't disqualify you if you have a physical condition. In Vancouver, Canada, where I'm from, there is a doctor who has admittedly ended over 1,000 people's lives. This same doctor has allegedly been named in 14 complaints with the College of Physicians, and she has been named in 2 criminal cases that are ongoing right now. One was with a woman who was wrongly approved, and a temporary injunction was placed against this doctor to stop. The other case was of a man who was on a psychiatric day pass, and he was provided MAID, and the family had no idea. You can just imagine that the same things are going to happen here. There are doctors that talk about the euphoric feeling that they get after they end someone's life. The term healthcare serial killers has been coined because some of these doctors actually have a lot of characteristics of serial killers. It's terrifying when you give people the ability to end someone's life. There are no psychiatric assessments done on the doctors who are able to provide this, and I think that's a really important thing. Saying that we just need to trust the doctors, I think, is a very naive thing. There is no guarantee of a peaceful death. There has been some research done on lethal injection recipients, inmates in the United States. There was 300 autopsies reviewed by Dr. Joel Zivit. In 88% of these 300 autopsies, the inmates' lungs showed in their autopsies that they were full of fluid. They had pulmonary edema, meaning that their lungs slowly filled with fluid, and they drowned in their bodily fluids. There are people in Canada that have argued that the drugs we use in Canada are different than the drugs used for the lethal injection patients. And so this study is irrelevant. But I ordered an autopsy for my mom. I didn't know why I did in that moment, but I just needed to know. I needed to have as much information as I could to try to understand this. And my mom's autopsy has been reviewed, and her lungs were filled with fluid. My mom drowned to death in her bodily fluids. And I don't know if the drugs that she was given to sedate her, to make her unconscious, if they were actually working when she slowly drowned. In Canada, a person is also given a paralytic. So if she was conscious, she wouldn't have been able to tell anyone that her lungs were filling with fluid and she was drowning. If a person's death takes 3 minutes, 3 minutes is a very long time to experience something like that. But if that death takes 20 minutes or 138 hours, the peaceful death that people are being promised is a lie. Assisted suicide in Canada has dramatically shifted the way people look at death. It's also shifted the way that people feel about healthcare. There are a lot of people now that are afraid to go to their doctor because they're not sure if their doctor is going to help them to live or if they're going to try to help them to die. We've also seen a lot of elderly people in hospital who now are afraid to be left alone. Family members are afraid to leave their loved ones alone because doctors will approach them and push made repeatedly. I have heard directly from people that have had to legally threaten the doctors that they need to stop bringing up assisted suicide because they are being preyed upon. When you have doctors, like doctors that people look up to, telling you that your life is no longer worth living, when do you start to believe that? It's no longer become a right to die, it's become a duty to die. That if you aren't financially contributing to society anymore, that your life isn't worth living. It shifts the way that we think about the elderly, how we think about people with disabilities. It's such an ableist view. And it's not a matter of if you will be affected by these laws. It's just a matter of when. Everyone I speak to now has some sort of story about someone that they know. You know, these politicians are saying, we need to trust the lawmakers, we need to trust the doctors. But you cannot safely roll this out. There's no safe way to do this, and it has nothing to do with trust. What is the price that you are willing to pay?